Hey everybody, we are super excited to be here today to talk to you about what we've been doing at Carta to connect our engineers to our executive with the goal of really trying to empower our ICs to make better and faster decisions. Between the two of us, we've spent almost 40 years in technology, and our experience has been that for most of the decisions we face, the only right answer ever is, it depends.
Do we want a relational database or a non-relational one?
It depends.
Are we gonna buy this off the shelf or build it ourselves?
It depends.
Can this procedure be eventually consistent or not?
Oh yeah, it depends.
Do we want to move fast and accrue some tech debt or do it right the first time? Should we use a monolith or microservices? Should we push or pull?
Oh, it depends, and it depends.
Okay, you keep saying it depends, but it depends on what?
It depends on a lot of things. It depends on how much it's going to cost. It depends on your time to market or other business goals. It depends on the existing architecture patterns in the code base. It depends on the staffing of the team, their skills, who's going to be the long-term owner. It depends on the performance requirements. It depends on the failure tolerance. I've seen decisions that depended on whether or not our support staff observed daylight saving time.
Okay, so it depends on like a dozen things. Which one of these is most important?
Shauna, it depends.
Somehow I knew he was gonna say that. And so often when we're having these conversations, the things it depends on have nothing to do with the technology. We often find ourselves talking about the principles and the people. If we only had to deal with the tech, that would be a heck of a lot easier. The principles and the people questions, that's when stuff really gets hairy. Getting all the necessary priorities and context into a room and properly considered can be time-consuming, exhausting, and sometimes just plain frustrating. You find yourself chasing consensus. And half the time you get down this path only to realize, oh, no two people actually agree on who the final decision maker even is. Then you do all this work and often end up making the same decision. Maybe you feel a little bit better about it. But the more time we spend in this churn, the more likely it is that everyone involved is gonna walk away saying, we don't have an engineering strategy. So what we want to talk you through today is some of the changes we've made to how we work at Carta to consolidate the inputs to these debates and empower our engineers to drive outcomes with more conviction in less time, and all the while providing our CTO with a direct connection to some of our most valuable ICs. But before we do all of that, we should probably introduce ourselves. My name is ShawnaM, and I'm a senior staff engineer at Carta.
I'm DanF. I'm the deputy CTO at Carta.
Deputy to the CTO.
It is the same thing.
It's really not.
Anyways, Shauna and I are two of the creators of a program at Carta we call Navigators. Navigators are essentially ICs that have partnered with our CTO to really help apply and evolve our engineering strategy. The core thesis behind this is that we want to enable these ICs to lead, to do their best work, to land better outcomes for themselves and for the company. Now, we're both ICs in pretty different leadership roles, and we've taken very different career paths to get where we are, but we have both seen and participated in a number of past attempts to make decisions more quickly. None of those have worked as well as what we're doing at Carta today, which is why we wanted to share with you what some of these past attempts were and why they failed, what we're doing instead, why it's working, what we've learned along the way, and what you could do to recreate this.
Now, throughout my career, I've seen several companies try to smooth this path to consensus and boost velocity. And so often it takes the form of a committee. In one case, it was literally called the Jedi Council.
Now, listen, I'm a big Star Wars fan, but I found this one really hard to believe.
Well, it was real, and frankly, I find your lack of faith disturbing. This isn't an obviously silly idea. It has a lot going for it. You don't have to wonder who the people are that you need to convince. It's really clear who the decision makers are. And they probably have some regular review time that you can sign up and bring your proposal. But I've seen drawbacks to these types of committees too. It can become a place you need to go to get a promotion or establish your clout. It can be really hard to know how much context to bring to the committee because you don't know how much context they need. And in sufficiently large organizations, maybe you have to wait weeks to get a slot, and you could be blocked that entire time because you don't have the committee's blessing yet.
Carta has had its own fair share of committees like this. None of them really worked for us. One of the common challenges is really rooted in these committees lacking a shared set of principles to guide their hand. Carta is a place that changes a lot. Changes in leadership, rapid growth, reorgs, move from monolith to microservices, an early push toward event-oriented architecture, new business units, acquisitions. These all compound to make decisions harder and harder to make and give us less conviction in them. our engineers were craving guidance in this area, and all these mechanisms we had were flawed at best. People were saying, we don't have an engineering strategy.
So it turns out, this right here, this is actually the root of our problem. Even when we knew ostensibly who could decide something, without this set of shared principles, those decisions could at best feel arbitrary or unfair, and at worst, just never get made at all. It means when we say it depends, our engineers don't understand what all it depends on or how to resolve those dependencies. So we did something that probably seems fairly obvious by this point. We wrote an engineering strategy.
It's easy to be a little abstract when we're talking about strategy, so here's a couple of concrete examples from our actual engineering strategy. You know, if you look at the first bullet there, it's very easy to imagine decisions around architecture or sequencing that are just made easy by pursuing that. Yeah, to put it very simply, to the organization broadly, our strategy is the principles and guidance that drive our decision making.
So we did have a strategy.
What do you mean?
I mean, we were making decisions, right? And those decisions were underpinned by some philosophy or principle, even if we'd been flipping a coin on every decision, which I can assure you we weren't. Wouldn't it be fair to say our strategy is spend no time making decisions and just go, go, go?
Yes, yeah. And there are probably a bunch of folks in the room today who also have a strategy that only exists implicitly or culturally. We would argue that's not enough. There is a lot of power in just writing this down. It forces you to think deeply and critically, not just about what your strategy is, but about why this is your strategy. It will also give you and your teams a lot to argue about. I'm only half joking. You might think you're aligned with your teams, and you would be surprised how much misalignment surfaces just by trying to write it down.
Most importantly, though, once we write this down, it allows us to elevate these ideas, giving voice to the engineering organization itself. This isn't just our opinion. This is the company's opinion. Rather than our engineers having to ask, what does Dan or Shawna think about this, they can consult with the strategy and ask, what does Carta think about this? Additionally, writing it down makes it much easier to recognize and communicate changes because your strategy will change over time.
Now, neither she nor I had ever written something like this, especially for an organization as large as Carta with 400 folks in engineering. And when we set out to do it, we were a little between CTOs. So we knew if this was going to happen, it was up to us. So we got a few other people. There were 5 of us in total, and we started by doing some research. What are other people doing in order to frame and communicate their strategy? And in that research, we found this guy. Will Larson has written extensively about engineering strategy, and this really jumped out to us because Will Larson also happens to be the guy who literally wrote the book on staff engineering, and more recently, he literally wrote the book on being an engineering executive. We have historically subscribed to a lot of his thoughts on IC leadership, and this meant we really took his direction on strategy to heart. We sought to apply his learnings to what we were doing.
And it's a good thing, too, because a couple of months later, we got a new CTO. It was Will Larson. You can imagine how validating that felt.
Yeah. Will's perspective is itself an extension of Richard Rumelt's from his book, Good Strategy, Bad Strategy. And as such, our strategy has 3 distinct sections. The first is the diagnosis. This is really just describing the current situation. What's working well? What's working poorly? The next comes the guidance. These are the principles that actually underpin our decision making, and ideally these kind of follow naturally from the diagnoses. Lastly, we outline any actions we want the organization to take kind of holistically that are the result of applying or perhaps just enabling that guidance. Sometimes we have guidance we need to get out there that has no corresponding action. It's just the guidance, and that's fine too. As we were putting this together, we were very focused on what we do today. And as you might imagine, when we looked around, we always could find some pockets of the organization with room for improvement. Maybe where we had prioritized the wrong things historically. When we were first writing this down, we were very tempted to try and fix this. But we knew if what we created here was just a wish list of how we imagined the company operated, the teams would view it as aspirational but unrealistic. They would think we were out of touch. They would reject and dismiss it outright. So instead, we tried to document honestly the principles we saw being applied today. If we had been making decisions with a coin flip, and again, we weren't, then that's what we document as the strategy, and we can all feel properly ashamed by it. After this sort of status quo strategy is out and in the wild and some of the controversy starts to settle, now we can start to enact changes to it incrementally, where the before and after is clear and we have a good mechanism to communicate that pivot.
So this was a really great start, but having our engineering strategy was really just step zero. We knew we couldn't drop these documents into Slack and ride off into the sunset as the conquering heroes. That wasn't gonna work. There were going to be people who didn't understand how to apply the strategy to their work. And there were inevitably going to be edge cases where the strategy just didn't work the way we had intended. So what we wanted were individuals who are close to the work, who could be held accountable for applying the strategy within their teams.
This is really where the idea of Navigators was born. But what is this group gonna look like? How does it work? How is it not just another committee? Well, the big difference between this and a committee, with a committee, you generally have some centralized strategy and a bunch of context decentralized into these teams. And an individual engineer is gonna carry that context to the committee where it gets combined with that strategy and a decision comes out. With Navigators, instead of sending the context where the strategy is, we are sending the strategy over to where the context is. Navigators are already members of the teams they serve. Every team is in scope for exactly one navigator, so we know who is accountable for these decisions. That navigator maintains tight alignment with the company's engineering strategy, and they combine it with their deep technical and domain expertise, and they make their decisions locally. All of the decision-making is decentralized.
This decentralization, though, it means that we need a pretty high bar for navigators. I'm gonna show you a giant wall of text that I'm begging you not to read right now, that is the announcement that we used when we rolled this program out to our organization. And what I wanna highlight here is our core thesis in this announcement. There are three really important pieces to this. The first one, we've already spent a bunch of time talking about this. Our navigators need to maintain strategic alignment with our engineering strategy and our CTO. The second bit, we're discussing our desire to reduce our reliance on consensus and boost velocity. This last part, though, this is where we're setting that high bar for our navigators. This is what it means to be a good navigator. Navigators are already existing technical leaders who have deep technical and domain context, and we trust their judgment. But we're giving them a new tool, the engineering strategy, and with that tool, offering them an extension of our CTO's authority within their teams. Now at Carta, we've decided all of our navigators will be ICs and not managers. And in our experience, it's pretty uncommon to give this type of authority and autonomy to your individual contributors. But we would really encourage you, don't underestimate your engineers. A sufficiently senior IC can take their deep understanding of the technical details and combine it with a pretty well-informed understanding of the organization more broadly. And their lens is gonna be different than that of your managers, who are focused, or at least more focused, on teams and execution, rather than software and systems. We really believe that this unique IC perspective is a critical component in making decisions about software, and not just architecture and design decisions. Our expectation is that our managers and our navigators will bring their complementary perspectives together to empower their teams to make decisions. And we found that this makes both more effective in their roles. So to that end, we do expect our navigators to help their teams make technical decisions around what we build and how we build it. But they should not be micromanaging every design and implementation, and they definitely shouldn't write every design spec. They do need to stay close enough to their teams to recognize decisions that might conflict with the broader engineering strategy, and close enough to the strategy and the intent behind it to know how to resolve those conflicts. What if the engineering strategy is wrong or lacking an exception? Our navigators are best equipped to identify those problems and escalate as needed.
At Carta, we have about a dozen navigators. In an organization as large as ours, 400 people, it's kind of tricky to keep it that small. One of the challenges stems from having some siloed teams that have pretty unique context. You know, sometimes it's easy. In one case, we had an engineering technical leader in an area of about 60 staff, and they had really good context. That was an easy pick. Elsewhere, we had a team of 5 with a pretty niche skill set, working on some fairly unique data problems. And this really left us with 2 choices. We can add another navigator who has pretty narrow scope, or we can find an existing one and stretch them over this new area. In practice, you'll find examples of both amongst our navigators. It's really a balancing act between the effectiveness of any single navigator who might be forced to ramp up on something new, versus the effectiveness of the navigators collectively, where if you have too many, it becomes hard to maintain inter-navigator relationships, and that makes it hard for us to iterate our strategy. In case you're wondering about the slide, by the way, these are alligators, and they're navigating. This is her fault.
The best jokes have to be explained on stage, but I'm going to put this slide in a museum. It's fine. Anyway, before we were talking about that, we were talking about iterating strategy. And navigators are a really important part of the future iteration of our strategy. They are, of course, the result of our engineering strategy and the interpreters for it. But they are also key to shaping this strategy going forward. All strategy is inevitably going to be a balance between global and local optimization, and it will be worse for some teams locally. Our navigators are the ones who are best positioned to identify these places where our strategy is failing and ensure their teams navigate that failure, ultimately working to improve the strategy.
But navigators don't own the strategy. We talked earlier about how we want to avoid consensus. The strategy is owned by the executive, by people in this room. Navigators advise and inform that strategy for sure. You know, the executive and navigator relationship is actually pretty tight and pretty symbiotic. The executive benefits a ton from these navigators having an ability to influence the strategy, and these navigators benefit a ton from their ability to influence the executive.
So we're well over a year into this now. Have we actually realized any of the benefits that we sought out? I think this is best described with an example, and this is actually from fairly early on in this process. One of the teams that I was navigating was considering building a new platform service. And we were encountering a problem we'd seen a few times previously, and it just didn't take that much imagination to see how this pattern could emerge in other domains in the future. So the team really wanted to dig in and kind of solve this once and for all. And it was true, on the surface, there were a lot of similarities. But when we dug into the details, there was sufficient deviation, it just wasn't obvious that a platform was the right choice. Now, in a pre-navigators world, I would have spent a bunch of time building consensus around the idea of not building this new platform. And I almost certainly would have needed to do some work to convince people who actually, the final decision maker even was. But now I was the navigator equipped with the strategy. And I could very easily say, no, we weren't going to build this new platform because it wasn't aligned with our strategy. This was specifically seeking out to be a one-size-fits-all solution, and Carta had decided that's not how we want to start new platforms.
I really like this example. It's so clear who the decision maker was, you were, and you had these documented guidelines you could hold the idea up against to help you make that decision, and you didn't have to litigate and relitigate why this was the rationale. You could just direct folks to the platform strategy.
And often this is how it plays out. Navigators are able to resolve these sorts of questions within their teams. And when there are cross-team concerns, we expect both navigators to be involved. I can remember just as ChatGPT was taking off, we found ourselves where our data team and our SRE team were misaligned on how to best equip our engineers to prototype with the technology while not running afoul of our data handling policies. But once the appropriate navigators got into a room, they were able to unstick it pretty quickly. And if they hadn't been able to find alignment, we would have expected them to escalate. I have no clicker. There it goes. Now, I know that word escalation can have something of a negative connotation, but when you're trying to accelerate decision-making, escalations are really great. Our intent is, of course, to inject strategy locally so that we can make decisions locally, but that's never going to work 100% of the time. You're going to have decisions that involve the trade-offs of the business goals of multiple teams and navigators, and that's something that navigators alone can't fix. You have to take those questions to someone with a wider field of vision. You have to escalate.
All right, we've talked about a few things so far. Consensus bad, strategy good, navigators helpful. Maybe you want to try something like this where you are. How do you get started? Well, we would encourage you as a first step to start by writing some engineering strategy that reflect the truths in play at your company today. Set aside any wish list. If you're having trouble, look at the past 2 to 4 hard decisions you've had to make and try and work backward. What were the principles that we were applying when we settled on this and not that? From there, you can try and identify 2 or 3 concrete actions that we may be able to apply going forward. We mentioned how we got a bunch of advice from Will Larson when we were going down this road, but the single best piece of advice we got was just to do this at all. You know, having a good strategy is good, but having a strategy is great. To shamelessly quote him for a moment, start wherever you are and start now.
And if you're looking for reasons not to get started, they will be everywhere. You're going to be missing information and context. That's okay. I think you're going to be really surprised at how much you learn just by getting started. And once you start, you're going to have pages of stuff that looks like this, things that just you throw away in the end. We have so many examples of stuff that didn't make the final cut for lots of reasons. Some of it was aspirational and unrealistic. A bunch of it was broad and unactionable, and if we're being really honest with ourselves, some of it was just us pontificating. If your strategy doesn't help you make decisions, it's not strategy. Maybe you want to write it down, but write it down somewhere else. We have oodles of examples of stuff we just cut, but this is one of my favorites. Only accrue tech debt intentionally. I mean, I'm in wild agreement with the sentiment, but we just couldn't see a path to where this would substantially change our decision making. If you're already talking about whether or not to accrue tech debt, you have formed at least some intentionality. And if you aren't talking about it, this line is probably not going to change that in a document.
Now, your first swing at this doesn't have to be for the entire engineering organization at your company. Depending on how big it is, you can start with narrower scope somewhere deeper in the organization. If there's somebody else who wants to take and run with this, encourage them to do so. They can provide a new tool into their toolbox, and they can use it to help them make their decisions. More broadly, you might already be thinking about who the navigators are in your org. You know who those strategic thinkers are. Get them together. Work on strategy together. If they are involved and feel a sense of ownership over this, they will be more aligned with it, and they will be more effective at applying it in their teams. You still own the strategy, for sure, but in this first pass, you really want to ensure that you are sponsoring these folks to help shape it, and you are supporting them to apply it in their teams. Invite them in.
And we understand there's risk associated with this pattern. You're putting a lot of trust into your navigators, and you're expecting them to use good judgment. It's a big responsibility. And it's why we think accountability is so important. You, as engineering executives, you need to be prepared to hold this group accountable for their decisions. And it's another reason we think it's important to keep this group pretty small. You won't get it right the first time or the second time, probably not the 10th time either. You're gonna iterate your strategy, you're gonna swap out your navigators. You know, it took us about 2.5 months to go from idea to launch, but we've been iterating this ever since. There probably isn't a single right to be found when you're trying to formulate your strategy, but success is finding ways to adapt as your engineering organization learns and grows.
We're about at time, so I'm gonna do a quick recap. You know, a written engineering strategy and a dedicated group of ICs to help apply that strategy and interpret it can really help accelerate your decision making and avoid consensus. These same ICs can help you iterate that strategy going forward and in many other ways be a close and valuable resource to the executive. At Carta, we have found this to be pretty transformational in how we work. Thanks.
Oh, great.
Oh, yeah.
Did you come across a case where an optimum technical decision did not align with the strategy? What steps were taken? Off the top of my head. I think that there's been, I was thinking about like language choices.
Oh, I was going to think about the monorepo.
That's better.
Okay. Our strategy was very aligned to focus on how we've seen success. And a lot of our success has historically been, hey, we've got these monoliths. A couple big O of one monoliths. And the encouragement we were providing was like, build in there. We don't have the muscle to do anything else yet. But we don't have the muscle yet. I'm not prepared to put out a strategy that says we're embracing this new thing, but we want to allow this team to experiment in this space to try and pave a golden path forward for how we can do other things. And so the right decision for Carta was, let's go try out this monorepo pattern that this engineering team had in mind. But the right strategy to everybody else was, don't do that. Eventually, this made it into the strategy. The strategy evolved as we found success in this pattern to become the new canonical way we would build some of our stuff.
So examples of topics covered in the engineering strategy. Our strategy has kind of evolved. We have a few different documents now, and the totality of them is our strategy. We have things around platforms and quality. And
LLMs.
LLMs, yes. We have something that we call our standard kit that helps our engineers understand, rather than spending weeks negotiating what language we're going to write this in, just consult the standard kit. It will answer that question for you. There are definitely others than Navigators as part of our engineering strategy.
I think one of the biggest ones we put out was, hey, we've reorged the company to work differently, and here's how that impacts your decision making. Here are the principles behind that structure that rationalize why it works this way.